The scariest discipline is not waking up early, grinding harder, or pushing your body to its limits. The scariest discipline is mastering yourself. It is facing your own excuses, patterns, fears, and habits without running away. It is looking in the mirror and realizing that the biggest obstacle to your success has never been the world outside, but the voice inside. Most people avoid this discipline because it demands honesty, consistency, and responsibility at a level that leaves no place to hide. Mastering yourself begins with awareness. You notice how you talk to yourself when things get uncomfortable. You observe how quickly you reach for distractions when focus is required. You recognize the patterns that keep repeating in your life: procrastination, self-doubt, emotional reactions, quitting too soon. Awareness is uncomfortable because it removes denial, but it is also empowering because you cannot change what you refuse to see. The reason this discipline is so scary is because it requires control over impulses. The impulse to quit when it gets hard, the impulse to delay when action is needed, the impulse to react emotionally instead of responding intentionally. Self-mastery means you no longer let moods dictate behavior. You do what needs to be done, whether you feel like it or not. That level of control separates average lives from extraordinary ones. Most people want motivation. Very few want discipline. Motivation is exciting and temporary. Discipline is quiet and relentless. It shows up on the days when nothing feels inspiring. It holds the line when comfort calls your name. Mastering yourself means choosing long-term growth over short-term relief again and again. That choice builds strength you cannot fake. Self-mastery also means taking full ownership of your standards, not society's standards, not anyone else's expectations. Yours. How you show up when no one is watching, how you treat your time, how you handle failure, how you follow through on promises you make to yourself. Broken promises weaken self-trust. Kept promises build unshakable confidence. Confidence does not come from success. It comes from integrity with yourself. Emotional discipline is a critical part of mastering yourself. Life will challenge you. People will disappoint you. Circumstances will test your patience. If emotions control you, progress will always be fragile. Self-mastery does not mean suppressing emotions. It means directing them. You feel fear, but you act anyway. You feel frustration, but you stay focused. You feel doubt, but you choose belief through action. Another part of this discipline is consistency. Anyone can push hard for a short period. Mastery is built through repetition. Small actions done daily shape identity. Over time, you stop forcing discipline because it becomes who you are. Your habits align with your goals. Your behavior matches your vision. That is when life begins to change on a deeper level. Mastering yourself also means accepting discomfort as the price of growth. Growth will demand sacrifice. It will ask you to let go of old habits, old identities, and sometimes old relationships with comfort. The discipline to stay committed when results are slow is what forges resilience. Resilience is not built in ease, it is built in resistance. This discipline is scary because once you master yourself, excuses disappear. You no longer blame circumstances. You no longer wait for permission. You become accountable for your potential. That level of responsibility is heavy, but it is also freeing. Because once you control yourself, the world outside loses its power over you. When you master yourself, discipline is no longer punishment. It becomes self-respect. Focus becomes natural. Confidence becomes stable. Progress becomes inevitable. The scariest discipline becomes the most rewarding one, because mastering yourself is how you take control of your life, your future, and your destiny. Self-mastery is the hardest discipline because it leaves no room for excuses, and excuses are the most comfortable shelter the mind knows how to build. Excuses protect the ego, soften failure, and delay responsibility. When you commit to mastering yourself, those shelters collapse. There is no one else to blame, no situation to hide behind, no justification that holds weight anymore. That is why most people avoid this path. It is not difficult because it is complicated, it is difficult because it is honest. Excuses thrive where awareness is weak. As long as actions can be blamed on mood, circumstances, timing, or other people, the mind stays comfortable. Self-mastery removes that comfort. It demands that you look at your habits without filters, your reactions without defense, and your patterns without denial. This level of honesty feels threatening at first because it challenges the identity you've been protecting. But that threat is also the doorway to growth. When excuses disappear, responsibility becomes unavoidable. Responsibility is heavy because it places outcomes directly in your hands. You can no longer say you would have succeeded if conditions were better. You begin to see that progress was delayed, not by lack of opportunity, but by inconsistency, distraction, or fear. This realization can sting, but it is also empowering. The moment you accept responsibility, you gain control. Control is the reward hidden inside discipline. Self-mastery requires control over impulses, and impulses are powerful. The impulse to quit when it gets uncomfortable. The impulse to delay when effort is required. The impulse to seek pleasure when focus is needed. Excuses give these impulses permission. Self-mastery removes that permission. It trains you to pause, observe the impulse, and choose a response aligned with your long-term goals instead of short-term relief. That pause is where discipline lives. This discipline becomes harder because it is constant. There is no finish line where self-mastery is complete. Every day presents new choices, new pressures, and new reasons to compromise. The mind is always negotiating for ease. It whispers reasons to skip, delay, or settle. Self-mastery means recognizing that voice and refusing to obey it. That refusal is repeated daily, sometimes hourly. That repetition is exhausting for those who rely on motivation, but strengthening for those who rely on discipline. Another reason self-mastery leaves no room for excuses is because it exposes patterns. Once you are aware of your tendencies, you cannot unknow them. You see how procrastination disguises itself as planning. You see how fear pretends to be caution. You see how distraction pretends to be rest. Awareness removes plausible deniability. From that point forward, every repeated mistake is a conscious choice. That level of accountability is uncomfortable, but it accelerates growth. Excuses also collapse when standards rise. Self-mastery is built on standards, not feelings. When standards are low, excuses feel reasonable. When standards are high, excuses feel embarrassing. You stop negotiating with yourself because you already know what is required. Standards simplify decisions. They eliminate internal debate. You act because that is what you do, not because you feel like it. This discipline also reshapes identity. As excuses fade, integrity grows. You begin to trust yourself because your actions match your words. Self-trust is rare and it is powerful. It creates confidence that does not depend on results or validation. Confidence rooted in self-mastery is stable because it comes from consistency, not outcomes. You know you will show up regardless of circumstances. Self-mastery is hardest because it removes the illusion of comfort without progress. You can no longer pretend you are working when you are avoiding. You can no longer confuse intention with action. You can no longer wait for the perfect moment. Action becomes the standard. Follow-through becomes non-negotiable. This discipline is demanding, but it is also freeing because once excuses are gone, momentum begins. Ultimately, self-mastery is the hardest discipline because it requires you to be both the coach and the student, the enforcer and the one being corrected. There is no external pressure, no applause, and no immediate reward. The reward comes later, in the form of strength, confidence, and control over your life. When excuses disappear, progress becomes inevitable. And that is why mastering yourself is difficult, rare, and transformational. Awareness of your thoughts, habits, and reactions is the foundation of personal control because you cannot direct what you do not first observe. Control is often misunderstood as force or suppression, but true control begins with clarity. Without awareness, life runs on autopilot, patterns repeat, reactions fire automatically, and habits dictate outcomes without conscious choice. Awareness turns the lights on. It reveals what has been driving behavior from the background. Thoughts are the first layer of awareness. Every action begins as a thought, often so quickly that it feels invisible. Limiting beliefs, self-doubt, fear, and assumptions quietly shape decisions long before action is taken. When you become aware of your thoughts, you stop identifying with every idea that SSEs through your mind. You begin to see thoughts as inputs, not commands. This separation is powerful because it creates choice. Instead of being dragged by negative thinking, you learn to question it, redirect it, and replace it with intentional focus. Habits form the second layer. Habits are simply repeated behaviors reinforced over time. They save energy by removing decision-making, but they can either work for you or against you. Without awareness, habits feel like personality traits. You say things like, "This is just how I am," or "I've always been this way." Awareness exposes habits for what they truly are, trained responses that can be retrained. Once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. Once you interrupt it consistently, you can replace it. Reactions are the third layer and often the most challenging. Reactions are emotional responses triggered by stress, pressure, or discomfort. They happen fast and feel justified in the moment. Awareness slows this process down. You begin to notice what triggers you, how your body responds, and what behavior follows. This pause between trigger and response is where personal control is built. You may still feel anger, fear, or frustration, but you no longer have to act from it. Most people believe they lack discipline or willpower, when in reality they lack awareness. They try to change behavior without understanding what drives it. Awareness removes guesswork. It shows you exactly where to apply effort. Instead of fighting yourself blindly, you work strategically. You stop wasting energy resisting symptoms and start addressing causes. Awareness also removes excuses. Once you see your patterns clearly, you can no longer blame circumstances entirely. You recognize where choices are being made unconsciously. This is uncomfortable, but it is empowering. Responsibility grows naturally from awareness. When you know better, you begin to act better, not because you are forced to, but because you understand the cost of repeating the same patterns. Personal control strengthens as awareness becomes habitual. You catch unproductive thoughts sooner. You notice distraction before it steals hours. You recognize emotional escalation before it turns into regret. This early detection makes change easier. The earlier you intervene, the less force is required. Control becomes calm instead of aggressive. Awareness also builds self-respect. When you observe yourself honestly, without judgment, develop a deeper understanding of who you are and who you are becoming. This understanding builds compassion without complacency. You stop attacking yourself for mistakes and start correcting them. Growth becomes sustainable instead of exhausting. Over time, awareness reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as reactive and start seeing yourself as intentional. Decisions feel lighter because they are conscious. Discipline feels less forced because behavior aligns with understanding. Control no longer feels like restriction, it feels like freedom. Ultimately, awareness is the foundation because it precedes every meaningful change. Without it, effort is scattered and progress is accidental. With it, growth becomes deliberate. When you see clearly how you think, act, and react, you gain the power to choose differently. That power is personal control, and it begins with awareness. Discipline outperforms motivation by creating consistency in all conditions because motivation is emotional and temporary, while discipline is structural and reliable. Motivation rises and falls based on mood, energy, environment, and results. Discipline does not negotiate with feelings. It operates on commitment. When conditions are perfect, both motivation and discipline can produce action. When conditions are difficult, only discipline remains. Motivation is exciting because it feels powerful. It creates bursts of action, quick starts, and emotional momentum. But it is unstable. The moment discomfort appears, motivation weakens. Fatigue, boredom, fear, or slow progress can shut it down completely. Discipline exists for these moments. It is designed to function when inspiration is absent. It keeps progress moving even when enthusiasm disappears. Consistency is the true engine of growth. Results are rarely the product of one intense effort. They are the result of repeated actions done. Over time. Discipline creates this repetition. It turns effort into routine. When actions become routine, progress becomes predictable. Motivation cannot sustain this level of reliability because it depends on how you feel. Discipline depends on who you decide to be. Another reason discipline outperforms motivation is that it reduces decision fatigue. When you rely on motivation, you constantly decide whether you feel like acting. This drains energy. Discipline removes the decision. You act because it is scheduled, expected, and non-negotiable. This frees mental energy for focus and execution rather than internal debate. Discipline also builds identity. Every time you follow through despite resistance, you reinforce self-trust. You prove to yourself that you can be relied upon. This self-trust compounds into confidence. Confidence then fuels further action. Motivation chases confidence. Discipline builds it. Over time, you no longer need to convince yourself to act. Acting becomes natural. Consistency under pressure is where discipline shows its true power. Life will not always cooperate. Stress, setbacks, and uncertainty are inevitable. Motivation tends to retreat during these periods. Discipline adapts. It may adjust pace, but it does not abandon direction. This adaptability keeps progress intact even when circumstances change. Discipline also separates intention from execution. Many people have good intentions. Few turn them into results. Discipline bridges that gap. It translates goals into daily actions. It holds standards when excuses appear. It ensures that progress continues even when results are invisible. This persistence is what produces breakthroughs that seem sudden from the outside, but were built slowly from the inside. Motivation can start a journey, but discipline finishes it. Motivation says, I want to. Discipline says, I will. This certain. Thank you removes hesitation. It builds momentum through action, not emotion. Momentum then creates its own form of motivation, grounded in evidence rather than hope. Ultimately, discipline outperforms motivation because it creates stability. Stability allows growth to compound. When actions are consistent across good days and bad days, results become inevitable. Discipline does not require perfect conditions. It thrives in imperfect ones. That is why it is the most powerful force behind lasting progress and personal mastery. Emotional control determines whether challenges build strength or create setbacks because emotions shape interpretation, and interpretation drives response. Challenges themselves are neutral. They do not decide outcomes. The way emotions are handled in the moment decides whether pressure becomes fuel for growth or friction that stops progress. When emotions run unchecked, challenges feel overwhelming. When emotions are directed, challenges become training. Emotional reactions are automatic. Frustration, fear, anger, and doubt arise before logic has time to speak. Without control, these emotions dictate behavior. You quit too early, speak impulsively, avoid responsibility, or make decisions you later regret. Emotional control does not mean eliminating these feelings. It means creating space between the feeling and the action. That space is where strength is built. When emotional control is weak, challenges are interpreted personally. A setback feels like failure. Criticism feels like an attack. Delay feels like rejection. These interpretations drain energy and distort judgment. Emotional control reframes the experience. A setback becomes feedback. Criticism becomes information. Delay becomes preparation. The situation remains the same, but the outcome changes because the response changes. Stress is one of the greatest tests of emotional control. Under stress, the mind seeks immediate relief. This is when poor decisions are made, quitting, numbing, blaming, or lashing out. Emotional control resists this urge. It prioritizes long-term benefit over short-term comfort. This restraint strengthens discipline and preserves momentum. Over time, stress stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like a signal to focus. Emotional control also protects confidence. When emotions swing wildly with circumstances, confidence becomes unstable. Success creates temporary highs. Failure creates deep lows. Control stabilizes this cycle. Confidence becomes rooted in behavior, not outcomes. You trust yourself because you know you will respond with intention regardless of the situation. This stability allows consistent performance even under pressure. Challenges also test patience. Progress is rarely immediate. Without emotional control, impatience leads to impulsive decisions and abandoned goals. Control allows you to tolerate uncertainty without panic. You stay engaged, adjust strategy, and continue forward. This patience compounds into resilience. Resilience transforms obstacles into stepping stones rather than stopping points. Another critical element is emotional recovery. Everyone experiences disappointment. The difference lies in how quickly you recover. Emotional control shortens recovery time. Instead of dwelling on frustration, you redirect attention to solutions. You do not suppress emotion, you process it efficiently. This ability to reset quickly keeps challenges from turning into prolonged setbacks. Emotional control also improves relationships and communication during difficulty. When emotions are managed, conversations remain productive. Problems are solved instead of escalated. Support is built instead of resistance. This social stability strengthens progress rather than draining energy. Ultimately, challenges are unavoidable. Setbacks are optional. Emotional control determines the difference. When emotions are mastered, adversity becomes a catalyst. Strength is forged, skills are sharpened, and confidence deepens. Without control, the same adversity creates hesitation, regret, and stagnation. Emotional control is not about being unfeeling. It is about being intentional. That intention transforms challenges into the very force that builds lasting strength.